Hi there once again and welcome to another Expresso mechanic tutorial. And in this one we are going to be burning rubber. As you can see, I've got a car on the screen, a very basic car, which I've rigged using the Bullet Dynamic engine and quite a few different elements of that, including a number of connectors and a couple of motors. So that's all set up. I've got a little bit of user data that I'm using to steer the car. Now, in order to create the smoke, I'm using a combination of thinking particles and pyro. So that's how we're doing that. And it's all working on the screen at the moment quite nicely. Now, there is a slight issue though with pyro. I've found that if you cache the pyro simulation, it doesn't match up with the car. And I don't know why that is. I've tried a number of things to actually sort of fix this problem, and nothing so far has worked. So there might be a bit of a challenge for yourself there. But anyway, that's what we're going to be about in this tutorial. So without further ado, let's see if we can make this happen. We'll start by bringing in a plane, and we'll make it 10,000 in both the width and the height. We can leave the width and height segments at 10. They're fine. So we've got a nice big area for our car to move around on. We can give this a collider body tag and we'll leave it set up as it is. We don't need to change anything. The next step, we'll bring in a cube and we'll set up the size of the cube as follows. So size X 400, Y 40, and finally Z 80. And that gives us a basic car body, a very basic car body, but it's good enough for our needs. And we'll just move that. In fact, yeah, I think we will move it. We'll move it over here. Just place it somewhere around there. We just change to our right-hand view, so F3, see where we are. We can probably drop this down some. Probably drop it down to somewhere around here. Okay. We'll bring in a cylinder object, and the cylinders of course will be used to make the wheels. Our radius we can make 35, so it's about the size of a real car wheel, and 25 for the height. We'll leave the height and rotation segments as they are and orientate this plus Z. We can then bring it over to our car and we can place it at 35 along the y-axis so that it sits on the floor. Hit O for object so that we get a bit closer and we can see what we're doing. Okay, so we can see that our car body is still a lot too high. We'll place our wheel at -100, and then we can copy by command dragging and then place this wheel at 100. So it's the other side of our car body. Drop the cube down so it's somewhere around there. That should be okay. And then we can think about creating two more wheels. So we'll drop this cylinder down here, drop this here, and this one here. And again, select both the cylinders, command drag to copy, and we can drop these just anywhere we choose really. Somewhere there will be okay. I think what we'll also do with our first two cylinders, or our first two wheels, is just drop them back a little bit. Right, fantastic. So we've got it that far. We'll just give this a colour, I think, so that it's more distinctive. Just make it a red, that'll be fine. And we can make these a darkish sort of grey, somewhere down there. Okay, that's fine. The next thing I need to do is give the cube a fillet, because I didn't do that. So we'll add a fillet just to make it that bit nicer. Just put 2 centimeters on there. And we can also fillet these. It doesn't really matter, but we can if we wish. We can just put a slight fillet on there. Let's go 1 or something just to give those a little bit of extra roundness there. Okay, moving on from here then, we need to rig this car and we need to make it work dynamically. So that's what we're going to be doing next. We'll come up to our simulate menu, bullet, and we'll grab a hold of a connector. Drop this connector into our first cylinder and zero it out. Great. So we've got it in the correct position. Now the connector's type needs to be wheel suspension, and it's already there, and we can see that it's got a spring and these two huge great posts coming out of it. Well, we need to work these out and sort them out. So first thing we need to do is work out the stiffness of our suspension. Now as stiffness, we want to make that 4, so we want quite a solid suspension, quite a hard suspension, and the damping will just increase to 30%. Leave these two as they are. We will take control of the steering, as I say, with user data, but that comes a bit later. Check both of these two boxes, and the from for the limit or the lower limit Y, this needs to be -20, and the to 20, and that sets it up exactly as it needs to work. Now the two objects, object A will be the cube, object B the cylinder. And the attachment A and B, leave those as centre of mass. So that's perfect. That's going to do the job for us. And then it's basically a case of just copying and dropping these in. So if we command drag to drop this into our second cylinder, all we've got to do is change the cylinder to cylinder 1, and everything else is the same. We've also, of course, got to zero our connector out, so we can just take away this -200, put 0 in there, and it's now in the correct place. And it's just rinse and repeat for the other two, so let's do that. So here we go, drop cylinder 2 into here, and then in our coordinates zero this out, and then finally we'll get this one done. And there you have it. Okay, so let's see what happens when we run the timeline. Well, we're getting an issue with that at the moment. It's telling us that things are not right. Now, the reason they're not right, of course, is because our cube and all of our cylinders need to be made dynamic. So that's the next step. We've got to give them all rigid body dynamics tags. We'll start with the cube. So we'll select that, bullet dynamics, rigid body. Now in our collision tab, this is the only thing we need to change, and all I'm going to do in here is make the friction 100%. The bounce, I'm going to leave at 5. I'll just leave that as it is. And then all we've got to do is copy these to our cylinders. Okay, so we've pretty much done it. And then all we need to do now is just check this, run the timeline, and we can see straight away that our car body is bouncing up and down as if it's on a suspension system. So that is now correct, and it's working exactly as we need it to. The next thing to do is bring in two motors. So we'll come down to bullet, motor, bring our first one in, and I'm going to group the motors into the cube. In fact, I'm going to group the motors and the wheels into the cube. So if we just bring all of this in and drop it in here, that gets everything grouped the way I want it. Now these two motors, they're both going to be set up the same way, but they need to be placed at the location of the rear wheels of the car. So let's do that now. We'll just drop this one into here for now, zero these out. So that's in the correct place, and then our second motor can be dropped into cylinder 1, and we can do the same thing. Great, so those are ready to go. Let's set them up. The type will of course be angular, because we don't want linear or linear and angular. We don't want that. We want them to rotate. Our objects, for our first motor, the cube will be object A and the cylinder object B. Our second motor, cube for object A, cylinder 1 for object B. We can then select both motors, because from here in they need to be set up exactly the same way. Mode does need to be regulate speed, and we need our target speed to be 2000 for our angular target speed, and the torque 500. So it needs to be quite a powerful motor to drive our car. And that is the motor's set up. Let's see what happens when we run the timeline. Straight away our car is off. It's working exactly as we'd like it to. Fantastic. So we've got the motors set up and ready to go. The next step then will be to work out what we're going to be doing with the steering. And for that, the first thing we need to do is add some user data. I'll drop a couple of nulls into the scene. Place my null one inside the original null and then drop both of them into the cube, and we can then zero them out. Just place our parent null just a little bit higher, and then we can move our null number one towards the front of our car so that it's in about the position of a steering wheel. Okay, and then we'll just change its object type to sphere, and I'll give the sphere a colour which will be bright yellow just to make it stand out. Okay, fantastic. So we've got that bit of it set up. The next thing to do is bring in another null. We will rename this Expresso, but I'm not going to be working on that just yet. That comes in a little while. And then we'll add some user data to here. So we'll add user data. We want to call our data, well, in fact, we'll add a group first, and we'll call this group steering. That gets that done. And then we can drop our data into steering, and we can call the data direction. It will be a float type. The interface will be a float slider, a real value, and the step we can leave at 1 for what it is. It doesn't really matter. The limit min we'll make -50, and the limit max 50. And as I so often do, we will clamp these values, and they're done there. We can then hit OK, and we've got our steering here. And that's all ready to go. Now, we've created the Expresso null. We can give it an Expresso tag. We've got our window open for the editor, and we're ready to do a little bit more work. Before we go any further, we'll just rename these two nulls. So this will be steering, and this one direction. Just makes them easier to work with. And then we can bring the Expresso null into the editor, and at the output stage come down to steering and select direction. We can then bring in the direction null, and at the input stage we want position, so transform position, position Z, and we want the same thing at the output stage, so we'll get that done. Moving on from here, we need a range mapper, so we'll come down to calculate, range mapper, place this over here and connect the position Z output from the direction into the range mapper's input. And then we can think about setting this thing up. Now, input lower will need to be -50 and input upper 50. And if we select our Expresso null and we go to our direction here, we can move this and we can see that that's working. So moving on from here, then we need to set the output stage. Now, the output range needs to be in degrees, and it will be -30 for the output lower, and for the output upper 30. And that's as much as we need to do. We can then bring in the connectors that we're going to use to steer the front wheels, and that will be the ones from the cylinder 2 and cylinder 3. So we'll bring this one in and this one in, and then we can connect the output of our range mapper, object properties, and it will be steering angle, and we need to do the same here. steering angle, and that gets that part of it complete. Now at the moment, if we move the Expresso null, nothing will happen because the timeline isn't running. Now one thing I'm going to advise you, if we set this here and we run the timeline, we can see that the wheels are wobbling. If we just move our angle here, we can see they're wobbling. Now you don't want that. So make sure at frame 0 you set this to 0. I mean, you might want a funny effect like that in a different kind of project, but we certainly don't on this occasion. So, you know, make sure you set that to 0, and now everything will be fine. Okay, and then if we wished, we can set keyframes up to handle the steering. What we'll do, just to prove that this works, we may as well do it. Let's just set this there, and we'll go through to 30 frames, and we'll move it to -50 and set that there. Let's have a go, see what happens. And we can see straight away the thing is moving and it's doing what we need it to do. We'll remove the keyframe animation for now, so we'll delete the track and we'll leave it there. But we've proved that all of this is working. Brilliant. So what I suggest we do is probably set the car up, and we'll set some proper keyframes, give ourselves some more frames as well, make it 1000 for what it is. We probably won't use all of them, but we'll set this up so that it actually performs like a donut, and goes into a nice slide, a nice power slide, and we'll set that up so that we've got that ready, and we can then think about the next step. We'll just close down the Expresso window, and then we're ready to move on. So we'll click on the null, and we want to work with the direction. So let's just run the timeline. Oh, in fact, before we do that, let's change our angle. Go back to 0. Change our viewing angle so that we can take in the whole scene. That'll do nicely, I think. Okay, let's play the timeline. We want to start steering probably around there, so we'll record our direction at 0 and then go forward about 10 frames. So get that set there, that'll do. It's a little bit more than 10, that'll be fine. And if we just bring this up to 50 and record there, and let's see what happens. Okay. Well, at the moment our car is just moving in a very pleasant arc, but that's not quite power sliding. So why is that happening? Well, if we take a look, and we'll select them all, if we take a look at our dynamics, in our collision we've got the shape set to automatic at the moment. Now that's the reason this isn't working the way I want it to. If we set these to moving mesh and have another go, let's see what happens now. Ah, and now we're power sliding and we're going into a donut. So that's a bit different. So that's why I didn't set that up earlier. I wanted to show you this. It is essential that you set this up in the correct way. If you just leave it at automatic, you won't get the result that you want. So make sure, if you're not getting the result you want and you haven't changed your shape, take a look in here. It will either be a moving mesh, convex hull, whatever, but just make sure that you do that. Okay, brilliant. So let's just run this again, and then we can see when we want to change the direction of our steering. So we go around there, do a bit of a donut, and I would say about there we want to change our steering. So let's go back into our Expresso null, record at 50 once again. Again, we'll move forwards 10 frames or thereabouts, somewhere there. Bring this back to -50 and record there. And then very quickly I think we're going to need to straighten up. So let's see what we're doing. Around she goes. Nice donut. And then we change direction. Oh, beautiful. And then what we can do about here, we can probably make that 0 again. So let's record at 50. And we'll go forward, I think, just 5 frames on this occasion. And then we can make this 0. Just 0 it out and record there. And let's see what we get. Not too bad. If anything, we could probably change the steering a little bit earlier, I think. So what we'll do with, let's just see where we are. If we just run it again, see where we come up to our steering. So we know that's our first steering there. And we start to steer there. Right, I think what we can do is move all of these. So if we just move them, say to around 350, that may be too early, but we'll see. But this is what you've got to do with this. It does take a bit of experimentation, really, just to get the desired result that you're looking for. Round we go. We start steering and we're going back the other way. Actually, that's not too bad, is it? Yeah, it's not too bad. It's going to go off though. So what I suggest we do there is move the two of these. Just move them forward again to say somewhere there. Let's again, as I say, pure experimentation because it's dynamic, so you can't actually kind of odds what it's going to do. You have to just experiment until you get the look that you want. Round she goes. And now we're straight. And I think that's fine. We'll leave it like that. I won't do any more with that. And what we'll do is cut the frames down to around 600. And that'll be fine. I think that'll give us enough to play around with. Fantastic. So we've got our car sliding around and doing a few donuts and behaving the way we want it to. So the next thing that we need to do is bring in some thinking particles and start producing the smoke effect from the rear wheels. We'll open the Expresso editor once again and just move things around a little. The first node that we'll bring in will be an absolute node. So we'll come down to calculate absolute. And we'll take this direction output from the Expresso node and plug it into the input. And that will take away the sign because we're not interested in working with negative values. We only want to work with positive values. So that's all good and that's doing what it needs to do. We can then bring in a compare. So we'll bring one of those in, logic compare, place it here and connect the output of the absolute to input 1. Now our function will say less than and we'll make it 25. Now what we're doing here, when the angle of the steering is less than, well, it's not going to be 25 degrees, of course, because we're converting from real values to degrees, but the equivalent of 25, basically, when our input stage is less than 25, then we want our particles to not be generated. We want them to be switched off. Okay, so when the steering is on a tighter lock than that, then we want to generate particles. That's what we're saying here, essentially. Okay, let's just set our view back to 100%. Fantastic. Now, we'll worry about this a little bit later. The next thing to do is bring in two P-storm nodes. So we'll come down to thinking particles generator, and we want P-storm. Bring in one of those and we'll copy it so that we've got a second one. And then we can think about setting this thing up. Now, we will need an emitter position and we'll also need emitter alignment for both of them. But where are we going to get these values from? Well, at the moment, we're not going to get them from anywhere because we haven't set anything up to actually produce them. If we switch to our right-hand view, let's see where we are. No, the right-hand view is no good. Let's go to our front view and hit H so that we can just see everything. If we'll just zoom in on the car and we can see that. What we actually need to do is bring in a couple of nulls. I'll call the first one T1 and the second one T2. Just for target 1 and target 2. Not really a good name for them, but it'll do. We'll drop them both into our cube for our car body and then zero them out. And then we can think about placing them. Now, we want to place these somewhere around here. And this is where we're going to place our particle emitters. So they're a little bit in front of the rear wheels. So we'll drop that into T2 and just zero that out. That makes that easier that way. Let's have a look where T2 is. Oh, I've done that wrong way round. Not the way to do it. Right, okay, T1, drop T2 into T1 and zero it out. That's the way. Okay, fantastic. But they need to be set differently to how they are at the moment because they're not quite there. Their Z positions are not right. So let's just switch to our top view and object and zoom in so that we can see where we are. Right, so let's just separate them and we can put T1 over here and T2 over here. We can actually say minus 100 for that and 100 for that just to make it correct. And we've got our two targets ready to go. The next thing we can do is drag them both into the Expresso editor, and we're ready to get both their global position. So we'll get global position for both of them. And then we also want their global matrices. So we'll bring those in as well. So global matrix. And we're ready to use these to position our emitters. So we'll connect these two up and connect these two up. Okay. If we switch back to our 3D view, we can see where we are. Now, our P-storm, we need to set these up. The first thing we need to do is make sure that the second P-storm here has a different random seed value to the first one. So what we'll do is say 1, 2, 3, and then we'll say, I don't know, 5, 7. That'll do fine. Doesn't matter what the number is as long as it's different to the other one. Moving on from here, we can start thinking about setting these up. Now, generally, they're going to be the same. So we can say that our type, we can make that a rectangle. The birth type will be count, and we want 300 particles. The life will make 100 with a variation of 40%. The speed, that will be 100 with a variation of 10%. We'll leave the size at 10, and once again we'll make a variation of 10%. The X and Y FOVs both need to be 30. And the sizes, they need to be different. Now, the X size, we can make that 30, and the Y size we want to be just 10. Other than that, we can leave everything as it is. Our two P-storms are now set up. At the output stages, we can bring in particle birth ports, and they're now ready to go. The next thing to bring in are two P group nodes. So let's bring those in. And they come from the standard, not the helpers. Don't bring the helper ones in, bring the standard ones in. That gives us one. We'll command drag to copy to give us two, and we'll connect those up. We'll also go into our simulate menu here, and where we've got thinking particles settings, we'll just make sure that we've got all of this ready to go, because we will need these. We've got all in the P groups, and that's okay. So they're ready to go, but we need to keep this available to us because we'll need it a little bit later. Okay, let's move on from here and see what we're going to do next. Another thing we need at the input stage, we also need ON ports. I forgot to do that earlier. That's another essential. So we'll just bring those in. So we've got our two ON ports and we're ready to move on to the next step. What we're going to do is actually move these over a little bit because we need to put another couple of nodes between them. we need some knot nodes, a couple of those. So we'll bring one in, set it up here, and again, command drag to copy so that we've got two. And then all we need to do is connect the output of the compare to the input of the knot, and then connect the outputs to the on inputs of our p-stall nodes. To finish things off, we need a p-pass node, so we'll bring one of those in. Come down thinking particles initiator, p-pass. And this is where we need to drag our particle group into the group field. So we've got that, and then we need p-gravity and p-size. We'll do the p-size first. We'll bring that in. So we come down to our standard menu once again, p-size, and we'll bring, oops, that's p-shape, don't want that. Let's delete that. We've got a clap of thunder behind me now. Let's bring the p-size in. There we go. And we can connect the output of the all to the particle input. Now, we need to do some work with the p-size to get it set up, because we do want this to be over age. So that's our next little step. What we need to do is remove this knot here. Basically, we just need that gone. And we need to swap these over so that we're black on the left hand side, and then we've brought the white one down to somewhere around here. And then all we've got to do is bring this very close to the left hand side, because we want the particles to be very small when they're born, but quickly get to their full size. That's what we want to happen. Okay, let's worry about this gravity. In order to do that, we just need to bring in a null. We'll call it gravity. If we just move our Expresso window, we've got our null over in the center. Now, at the moment, we haven't got a pre-gravity node, so let's set that up first. We'll bring that in as a dynamic p-gravity, and we can plumb the output of the p-pass into its input. Now at the moment we've got no object, so we need to drag our gravity into there. But if we switch, let's just move this out of the way again. If we switch to our right hand view, we can see that our gravity isn't facing in the right direction. And on this occasion, it doesn't need to be pointing downwards, it needs to be pointing upwards. So we need to rotate this thing, and we need to rotate it through 90 degrees. We'll hold down the shift key, rotate to 90 degrees, and now it's pointing in the correct direction. Fantastic. So that's our gravity in our scene and sorted out. We now just need to adjust the strength, and we're going to make that 50. And that completes it. That's all of the Expresso done. Let's see if we get the result that we want. So let's just switch back to our 3D view. And let's run the sequence and see what happens. And we're starting to produce particles. And there you go. And you can see that they're following the car, and they're floating up and then disappearing. And there you go. That's the result we want. As soon as it straightens up and leaves that behind, the particles switch off. So we can see that that's working absolutely as I said I wanted it to. So there you go. That's how you set it all up. Fabulous. So let's move on from here, and we'll bring in Pyro and see what we can do with that. The first thing we need to do is bring in, from our simulate menu, TP geometry. Brilliant. So we've got that in. Now our TP geometry needs a particle group, so once again we need to bring in our settings, and we can drag the all group into the particle group. Moving on from here, we can add a pyro tag to the TP geometry. So simulation, pyro emitter. And then we can think about how we're going to set this emitter up. Well, the thickness we can make 1 centimeter. The density set, 0.5, and the density add, I'm going to make 1. The temperature, we don't need at all, so we'll click in the checkbox to switch that off. Let's see what we get. So we'll just run this. We know we're going to start generating particles, and we do, and we can see that we've got pyro associated with it. What we'll do to make that easier to see, if we just come up to our thinking particles settings and we say none in there, we can now see that we're getting pyro. So we are getting smoke coming out of the tyres. Not 100% perfect. Let's just go into our top view, see what we're getting there. H, and if I change my display to garage shading lines, let's see what we're getting. Well, it isn't 100% perfect. What we can actually do is probably move these two. We can actually move them back. And let's see what we get now. If we go to our 3D view and run this again, let's see what we get now. Yeah, I mean, that's slightly better, I think. Yeah, I mean, that is looking quite good. Let's go into our top view once again. Yeah, I mean, that's okay, isn't it? They're coming out of the tyres okay. And of course, this is very low resolution. You get a better result if you did render this. But we can see that that is working. It's actually doing what we want it to do. There's still some more work that we've got to do with it in order to really get it going the way we want it to. Okay, but that's so far so good. Let's just go into our project settings here. So we've got a simulation tag and pyro. Voxel size, you can make that smaller, or you can leave it at 5. It just depends what you want to do with it. Add a couple of sub steps. Let's have a look what we've got down here. Density buoyancy, that's okay. I think that's absolutely fine. What have we got in the density? Right, now the density, or the relative density dissipation, I'm going to make that 45%. And I'm going to make the absolute density dissipation 0.06. So I'm going to make those two changes in there. And I think we can leave everything else the way it is. So we've done those two things. Let's just see what happens. Okay. Yeah, that's made some difference to it. And we can see now that we've got smoke actually floating upwards, and it's behaving in a better way now. So yeah, I mean, I'm quite happy with the way that looks. And I know for a fact it will look better if it's rendered, but that's looking okay. One thing we might wish to do, if we just stop the simulation, is just go into our Expresso and just look at this P size. We could put some variation in there if we wish to. Make that, say, 60%. If we wish to, we can make the P size slightly bigger. You know, it doesn't have to be 10. It's entirely up to you. You can art direct this in any way you want, but for what it is, I'll probably leave it where it is. Now, what I wish to do to show you the problem that I found with Pyro with this, if we just, let's see how many frames we actually need. I won't need all of them, so let's just see what we get. All I want to do, I'll go to about, I think, say 180 frames. If I go that far, yeah, if I make my display 180 here, that just gives us enough, I think, to be able to show you what I want to show you. Now what I'm going to do is select my pyro output, and we don't need the temperature, so we can switch that off. We'll leave the velocity and we'll leave the density because we definitely need the density. Now in this cache here, what I'll do, I'll cache the scene, and then by the power of editing, I'll come back to you and I'll show you the result that we actually get. So I'll hit the button. Okay, let's check out the result that we get. If we go into our top view, we run the sequence, you'll see the car come into view. And at the moment, we're not seeing anything at all. Let's just go into our display here, make sure that we're getting everything that we want. Let's go back into our 3D view actually and just see if it works from here. Yeah. Now look what's happened. You can see that we're not getting the result that we want, and I don't know why this is. When this actually cached, the pyro was coming out of here, and yet when you play back, it's over here. You can move it, you can pick it up and move it if you wish to, but good luck with that. You'll never get it to follow the car correctly. But this is what happens when you cache it. Now, it's very, very odd, and there doesn't seem to be a way to correct it. And it might be because it doesn't play well with the other dynamics. I just don't know. I mean, you know, it's quite good that you can get the two systems actually working together in the first place, but it's very, very strange. It just doesn't match up when you cache it. You can render this out without caching it, and you'll get a reasonable result. I wouldn't say you'll get an absolutely perfect result, because what you sometimes find is it will go so far and then the smoke will disappear for a bit and then it basically comes back. So you probably would be able to do it in edits. If you set up a shot like this, you could probably put a camera there over here and get this particular shot for this far and then cut to another shot. You know, you might have to be clever like that and do a bit of work with the editing in order to get it to really go. But yeah, it's one of those funny things. I don't know what's causing that. I don't know why that should be like that. But that's just the way it is, and there doesn't appear to be anything you can do about it. But it's some food for thought for yourselves. I mean, if you want to have a go at it and see what you can do, see if you can find a fix. And if you do find a fix for it, whatever you do, let me know. I'm really, really interested. So, please share if you do find a fix for this. But I've so far drawn a blank on it. I've not been able to do anything about it. But anyway, that is how you would go about doing it. And then, of course, if you want to do anything in here, just give it a material, give it a pyro volume. And then if you need to do any work in there, you can set it up as you need to set it up. It's up to you to play around with it and do whatever you want to do with it within the volume, and then render from there if you wish to. But yeah, and then of course you just put the pyro volume on the pyro output. That's where it goes. So then you can render out if you wish to. But yeah. It's a very, very odd thing, that is, the fact that does that. I just don't know why that does it, but unfortunately it does. Yeah, I mean that's the way to do it. I mean, obviously you don't even have to use pyro on this if you don't want to. With the thinking particles, you could bring in a tracer object and use that, so you get a more sort of artistic look for your smoke coming out of the tyres. You know, something like that, or you can just put some geometry in there. And just use the TP geometry with the P-shape node in the Expresso here. If you go into here, we can put our node in to do that. We can come down to thinking particles here and get a hold of the P-shape. So we can put geometric shapes in there and just plumb those in, and you can use that if you wish to. So you're not restricted to using pyro at all. As I said earlier, you could easily use a tracer and just put a hair material on the thing. That would work fine. As I say, you're not really restricted too much here. There are a number of options for you to get this across. But I wanted to try and do it with pyro. I was interested to see if I could make the two dynamic systems play together. And to an extent, it does work, but I wouldn't say that it's absolutely perfect because of this issue here. you know, it's certainly not. It's a bit of a pain that you can't actually cache the dynamics properties of Pyro and actually make it match up with this. The thing is, you can't really fully cache these dynamics either, because the interesting thing is, if you go into the connectors here, we've got a cache tab here, but it says use cache data and clear cache, but it doesn't say, you know, create cache. There's nothing to do that there. But of course we've got it here. We've got this bake objects and bake all and everything else, and I'm assuming that these things get baked if you do that as well. I don't know, but I'm assuming that's what happens. But the interesting thing is the motors, if you select those, they don't have any way of being cached. So, you know, this dynamic setup, you can't, I don't think, fully cache all of it. And that maybe is another issue that causes a problem with the Pyro tag. I just don't know. It's one of those things. At the moment, it's just not playing together properly. I think once we actually get the bullet dynamics, all of these connectors, springs, forces, motors, once they're all in the unified dynamics and we don't need the bullet dynamics anymore and they can be retired, then maybe we'll get a different result. But they need to port all of that stuff over into the unified dynamics. And until they do, it's impossible to say whether or not this problem can be eradicated. But yeah, at the moment, as I say, it's just the way it is, and there doesn't seem to be a workaround for it. But it's a challenge for you, maybe. See if you can find it. But anyway, that just about brings us to the end of this tutorial, because I've shown you the things that I wanted to show you within this one. And as always, I really hope you've enjoyed doing this and that it's been fun and that it's given you some ideas for things that you may be able to incorporate within your own projects. And if you have enjoyed the video, please give it a like. And as always, if you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel, leave a comment, and of course, ring the bell. And wherever you happen to be on social media, please do share this video, because all this good stuff really does help keep the channel moving in the right direction. But anyway, that just about brings the curtain down on this one, so I'll see you very soon on the next tutorial.